So to have that conversation, we have a wonderful panel here today with experience in real-world implementation of projects and a strong connection and familiarity with Indian ecosystem for doing that. So thank you all very much. Also thank all the audience in advance for your questions, etc. We're going to do things differently. We're not going to have lectures. We're going to have a discussion, and then hopefully you'll be part of that discussion. So I'd like to start by introducing the panelists. So Damini Agarwal, welcome. Damini is Chief Technical Officer at Infant Biomedical Technologies. For over 10 years, she's worked there, and she has considerable expertise in both the technology and infant education sector in India. And she's a Hopkins alum. Anand Kapai, welcome. Anand is Vice President and Global Head of Global Commercial Marketing for Siemens with a focus care with over a decade of experience at Siemens, and of course, experience working in the field as well. And he's also a Hopkins alum. Dr. Kunal, I should say Professor Kunal Parikh, is assistant professor at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, and extensive experience in developing portable technology for healthcare in India and around the world, especially in ophthalmology. So, and he's also at Johns Hopkins. And last but not least, Jordan Shuff. Jordan is executive director of Vigilant, a startup focused on vision care in developing countries that focus initially in India. And all of her work is centered on healthcare access. And by the way, Jordan is also at Johns Hopkins. So that was the requirement of the whoever the not alum is me. So let's start by we'll start with you. We can talk about some of your experiences on the implementation side, some of the challenges that you faced.
Yes, that's a great question. So, I will first start with maybe what was the biggest learning that I took away from my Hopkins education and why I feel relevant from an Indian context. Hopkins taught me never to be afraid of the unknown, and entering, with our products into the Indian market was kind of like entering into the unknown. I say that for various reasons, and I think that ties to implementation challenges. Is that we work in the prosthetic space, so it's a very cross-collaborative industry that relies on relationships between manufacturers, clinicians, surgeons, patients, families, and then of course payers and the regulatory component. Right? So it's a very cross-collaborative industry. And in higher income countries, a lot of the workflows to integrate new products into these programs is very well established. But here I was, and we landed in India, and we wanted to work with the Indian clinical workflow. And what we realized is that there was no workflow. So the first unknown that we encountered was, who are the key stakeholders in this environment? How do you engage with them? And that brings me to the second unknown, is that very often in order to implement things in India, you first have to work on building trust in relationships with the various stakeholders in that geography, which takes time. So, that brings me to the third unknown, is that when you're working in lower middle income countries, being able to predict your timeline is often very difficult because it relies on changing policy. It relies on changing stakeholders. And the head of some department when they change, and now you have to build relationships with us with a new person altogether. And it's often, also a function of geopolitical situation. So I think the biggest obstacle in my mind towards implementation is encountering the unknown. And whatever we can do to mitigate that going forward, and obviously there's numerous initiatives that are in place that are helping encounter some of that, can help with more effective deployment of innovation.
So as Dr. Yazdi mentioned, I run this one. We are a digital health spin-out that's working to increase access to eye care. So this came out of my research at Johns Hopkins, as well as collaborations with 4 leading research institutions in India. So I think something that helped us a lot with moving from piloting to implementation is the fact that this was very homegrown in the way that this technology evolved. So our partners on the ground, our eye hospitals, identified the needs themselves and then have been part of each iteration, collaboratively developing the technology, piloting the technology, giving feedback, and ultimately shaping the path and actuating the technology. Some of the things that we have learned, we've learned many things, but is just the importance of, as you mentioned, the workflow. So at each hospital we've worked with, we found that there's a very different way of doing things and that impacts the technology. And so being able to build things that are flexible to the needs of both the public sector, the private sector, as you face those different pathways, and then having those champions who have been there since the beginning has been really important for us.
Okay, so I will continue on the same line. So I'll just share that I think Youseph, implementation starts with what you're doing in the first place, right? And so I think that the challenge that I still see broadly is, are we focusing on needs that matter for the population around us and for what the need actually is? And so I would say that oftentimes when I look at their incredible research institutions, engineering institutions, management institutions in India, but I rarely find folks who are working on problems that matter towards the need around them. And much more often I find, hey, this could be exciting for a publication or for a patent, or this is interesting, I could work on this is something that would be feasible to do. And it oftentimes seems like the incentives are not the right incentives for ultimately having a big impact on healthcare in a practical manner. And so to me, it starts with, actually focusing on what matters in the first place. And so, as Jordan mentioned, I think really deeply understanding that unmet need is the most important thing. And so, for example, within ophthalmology, we probably spent about 5 years every year going and visiting eye care systems in India, spending 14 hours a day going into the OR, observing kind of in the clinic, in the OR, looking at procedures, interviewing with doctors, nurses, caregivers, anyone that we could get a hold of, and then working very closely with them to understand which of these needs are actually the most important to solve. And then what are qualities of solutions that can actually address those needs in a meaningful way. And as Jordan said, working very iteratively and collaboratively with these partners. And so, to me, it actually seemed very odd that, we were based at Hopkins in Baltimore, and we're going to India and spending time with these stakeholders to understand their unmet needs. But oftentimes within India itself, it doesn't seem like they're necessarily focusing on the needs that are most important to them. And so to me, that's kind of where I think is the most important place to start. The other kind of things I'll mention, you talked about the unknown. So there's a great kind of comment about startups, which is a startup is like chewing on glass while staring into the dark abyss of the unknown. And so, it's very painful and uncertain, right? Those are kind of the two qualities of startups and creating new technologies. It's not easy to create a new technology, right? So you have to have at the end, whatever your reason is for starting a company, creating a technology. In many cases, I think the people in this room would largely be driven by impact. We actually want to solve problems. We want to alleviate suffering. But there has to be on the other side of that unknown, you have to know that there's an opportunity that if I am successful, if I'm actually able to develop this technology, if I'm actually able to get through this path, if I'm actually able to develop something that actually is meaningful, can fit into the clinical workflow, that there will be an opportunity to scale that. There will be an opportunity to sell it. And I think that's the other piece that's very difficult and missing oftentimes, is knowing that if I actually am successful in developing this technology, that there will be opportunities for it to scale, for it to get into public hospitals, for it to get reimbursement. And so without that sort of, opportunity or that clear opportunity at the end, it can make it very difficult at the beginning to actually for people to want to start and to get going.
Thanks, Kunal. That's two very amazing points over here. So for we at Siemens, our mantra is we want to find bold solutions for everyone, everywhere, sustainably. That doesn't mean that we have all the answers. That means that we are trying to find answers to those questions. And as doing that, we have succeeded many times and we've also failed many times. And we failed many times in emerging markets because we didn't understand the needs of the consumer very, very well. Let's give you an example. We thought India is all about making stuff cheaper. Okay. Cheaper, faster, better, great, it'll work. We also thought, okay, there's a lot of quality conscious customers over there. So if you make something which is best in class, globally adopted, put it in India, it'll work. Well, guess what? That also many times did work. So what I mean to say with all of this is that with the kind of changing needs of the consumers in India, there's a fine balance that needs to be there. There's a consumer, which is in the tier 1 cities. Their needs are very different from the consumers in the tier 2, tier 3 cities where 2/3 of the population resides. So when you start to look at solutions, you start to look at local interventions, you've got to have that balance between the two. Because if you don't have that balance, you'll be caught. And we've had several examples where we've been caught and where we've been very, very successful. You know what they say about India? Whatever you believe of India to be true, the opposite is also true. So as we navigate this very, very interesting landscape of India, and I'm, by the way, very, very bullish about India, very, very cautiously optimistic about India in certain ways. I believe there's a tremendous amount of learning and scale that we can achieve in India.
Thank you so much. To quote relative to what Kunal said about choosing the right problem, right focus of your project, there's a quote that we use in our program as well, that the unsung hero of innovation is choosing the right problem to solve. And you talked about addressing different tiers in the healthcare system, or the socioeconomic tiers within India. It's probably true also of China and other emerging markets. How does the company address that? Are you looking to the future and addressing the bottom of the pyramid, or are you along the lines of the portion of the bottom of the pyramid, the Pralad's book, or are you looking at the mid-tier, or are you just trying to make as much money as you can at the top of the pyramid? What is the strategy there, and what do you think should be the strategy?
A great question, Dr. Yazdi. As a marketer, it's all about segmentation. Okay, so it's all about segmentation, targeting, and positioning, right? So we know our core competencies. We know which segments we are good at, which segments we're not so good at. Then the question becomes, what battles you want to pick. Now, why am I bullish about India? Why am I cautiously optimistic about India? And what kind of solutions are we thinking about from an India standpoint? But before I do go there, let me talk about the signals that I'm seeing in India. There's obviously the cornerstone of affordability that exists in India, but that affordability is also translating into outcomes. What outcomes am I going to get? This is not just in tier 1 cities, it's also in tier 2, tier 3 cities, where people want to know, if I'm going to go to the hospital, what will be the outcome? Now, actually, that sometimes also means they don't go to a hospital because they believe that going to a hospital will get them hospital-acquired infections, so might not even go there and look at alternative medicine. So one thing is the consumer demands are shifting, and they're different across different cities. Second thing that we're seeing is supply chain. As a company, if we want to really invest in India, we've got to look at the supply chain dynamics. There's a lot of China for China policies. I'm sure some of you have heard of BBP that's happening in China. There's a lot of reference given to local manufacturing. Same thing happening in India as well. Right? There's a lot of incentives for local manufacturing. So the dynamic of supply chain is shifting, and there's now global companies are looking at India as an investment hub for that. And you also have a lot of in India FDA approved places where you can actually get out the product and manufacture the product. And Siemens as a company has been a huge amount of investment over there. We've got our 4 innovation hubs. One of them happens to be in Bangalore, where we've actually invested 160 million euros just to build talent for not just innovation, but also for manufacturing. So supply chain is the second aspect of it. The third aspect that we're closely looking at as we look at the markets and the segments is, where does the infrastructure exist? Does it have the infrastructure to really have the wherewithal for us to be able to succeed over there? Companies like us need digital infrastructure. Okay, so with schemes like Ayushman Bharat that we're closely following, we're trying to see how that can create the digital infrastructure. Because if that's not there, then there's a problem with reimbursements, and then it's a gap getting. That's the third thing that we're looking at. We're also looking at a lot of local companies, by the way, over there, because there are certain things that we can do well ourselves, but there are lots of other companies out there, small startups, that are doing some amazing things. Some are focusing on logistics, some are focusing on purely services, some people are focusing purely on product innovation. So we're closely watching all of them, because this could be the next big thing. So there's a lot of emphasis on private sector funds as well as private sector innovation for that. that's another key to the story. So all in all, I think from our standpoint, we are closely watching all these signals in the market, really look at which segments of the market do we want to compete in based on the signals that we're getting from the market. We are pretty big in India from the solutions that we serve, but to really go and scale, I think there's a lot of integration that needs to happen with different parties over there in India.
So, thank you so much. That's the. I didn't get the exact answer about whether you're actually going to be innovating for those lower tier markets. Do you think that's something Siemens can do, or is it you believe it's not a competence that a large multinational that's used to dealing with wealthy markets? Do you think that's something that you were able to do, or
Yes.
will you rely on local partners to do that sort of innovation for the bottom of the pyramid?
So we're already doing that in multiple ways. In fact, we have certain products that are specifically targeted at tier 2, tier 3 markets. So we have that. Now, looking at more products and more innovation, it's a twofold thing. One is our innovation hub is focusing on making products specifically for these markets as well. So there's a lot of innovation coming, not only in vitro diagnostics, but also in imaging. So there's that happening for sure. So from that standpoint, tier 2, tier 3 markets is definitely a focus area for us. As far as more and more innovation is concerned, beyond what we do, partnership would be the other piece that we'll be focusing on. So to answer your question simply, yeah, absolutely, we're going to focus.
And is there any you get any pushback from the European or US based business that if you develop a successful high quality product for tier 2, tier 3, that it will cannibalize your products for the top of the market?
Well, that's the first question we try to answer in terms of whether this will be a product that is going to be complementing a portfolio or whether this is going to be cannibalizing a portfolio. But in the end, it's all about where do we get incremental business from. So we've actually done a few projects and products specifically targeted at incremental business and not cannibalization of business. But here's another thing, right? The opportunity is so huge in these markets that it actually ends up providing more incremental business than the cannibalization business in certain areas. Because tier 2, tier 3 market is a very, very open area for most large companies.
I'm glad you didn't say, but the quality is so low that the tier 1 won't want it. So it's still a good quality product.
Yes.
So one of the lessons from that book, Prahlad's book, is that trying to get to that bottom of the pyramid by delivering a lower quality product is not going to work.
Absolutely not. I think that's one of the areas that we thought that something which is cheaper, could just work. But the dynamic is different. It's not about just cheaper, it's also about quality product at an affordable price.
Absolutely. So, Damini, you and Jordan mentioned something very important, and that is about relationships. You talked about how critical that is and how much it can become a challenge because the landscape changes, people change. And Jordan, you talked about how important it was for business that you had a strong relationship with partners there who helped throughout the entire process. In not even starting from identifying the problem all the way to developing. But how do you to be successful? And then Anand, you also mentioned the relationship important there. So how do you develop those relationships? Is it possible for a Western or American-based company or organization to develop those relationships in a way that overcomes some of the barriers of mistrust or cultural differences, organizational differences, etc.? How does that seem?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will say at this outset that it does make things easier if you have physical presence on the ground. It helps in having face-to-face interactions to build some of those relationships up. But I think what also is important, and Jordan kind of wanted to this in her when she spoke, is that engaging in a meaningful way can also help build some of those relationships up. So for example, and I think these are some of the fundamental practices we follow in the States as well when we're designing new products, is engaging with stakeholders early, engaging them in prototype building, iterative feedback, doing user testing with them. And we did the same, back in India as well, is that sure in this case we were not developing a brand new product, but we still went through that process to identify if there were any changes we needed to make to our existing products to suit them better for the Indian market. And I think that helps build some of that relationship and trust. It's a little different where, it's not always a pure professional conversation that you need to have. You also need to make sure that you're taking into account that person's, you're being a human being. So, checking on their family, finding out about the latest trip that they took. So engaging in conversation that is more than just what you need from them. And I think the third aspect that I very strongly believe in is giving before you ask. So in a lot of, this is not just limited to India, it's everywhere around the world. I think relationship building is very heavily dependent on what you're willing to give and how you're willing to go out of your way to help the person before asking for something in return. And that really helps in building some of those relationships up, even when you don't talk anybody at all in that space.
Yeah, I can add to that, as a Westerner who's been building relationships in India for a while. I think a lot of the hospitals we work with, unfortunately have a little bit of a higher regard for foreigners than even some of their Indian counterparts. So I'm able to get a foot in the door very easily, which maybe shouldn't be the case, but then a lot of the hospitals also are used to taking philanthropic funding or outside funding to fund things. So they're used to almost putting on a show, putting their best foot forward, which doesn't allow you to see the true needs or to truly understand the challenges in the and unfortunately, I think the only way to overcome this is to spend just a lot of time there. Like there's only so long that you can put on a show before the mask has to come down and you can understand the true problems. So I've been fortunate enough to spend many, many months at some of these hospitals and to build deep relationships. I think the other thing is understanding the power structures that exist. I've seen a pretty strong hierarchy of power in many of the hospitals we've worked with. And an example that still makes me laugh is that we have a weekly meeting, Kunal and I, with one of our hospital sites every week. And we'll ask, how is the technology working? Is it okay? And they'll say, yes, no problem, no problem. And then 5 minutes after the meeting ends, one of the women, like a 25-year-old woman who runs the program, will call me and say, there's a problem. And something that she's maybe wouldn't admit in front of Dr. Kunal Parikh, but because I'm a younger woman, I've been able to, learn about their families, ask about their kids. Like I know who has a secret boyfriend. I know all of those things. That I'm able to be like a trusted person for them, even though I am outside of Indian culture. So just understanding those power dynamics and where there are areas to make relationships has been really important. On the flip side, I think I will never have as strong a relationship as Kunal does with some of the hospital leaders who are older Indian men who I maybe struggle to form those relationships with. So just having a diverse team with diverse backgrounds and being able to engage across multiple types of people has been really important.
Might I add something to this? So this is very helpful because I'm also learning some new things. So it's good that you're learning about some of these needs, even if I'm not seeing them or hearing about them. But I just want to emphasize a couple of points. I think the adage about they don't care what you know until they know that you care is very relevant here and very important. The other piece that has always been very important to me, I'll just share the first anecdote. So I visited Aravind Eye Hospital for the first time when I was 26, towards the end of my PhD. And one of my mentors had invited me to come and visit. And he said, just go and see, maybe they can help you with some of your technologies. Maybe you can learn about kind of what they're doing. Maybe there are ways to work together to have an impact. And he just, kind of sat me in the hospital and just started interacting with some of the doctors there. And I remember talking to one of the ophthalmologists in oculoplasty. And just, okay, like, what are your challenges? Like, what are your needs? Anything we can help with? And she almost started crying. She's like, Kunal, in the last 20 years I've been practicing, no one has ever asked me, like, what can they help with? Like, what are my challenges? What are my needs? And she literally, without having, been asked before, she listed off 20 needs, unmet needs, immediately, just like this. And so that led us to then spend another month there, just kind of working with them hand in hand, trying to understand those needs. And really just starting, because I think if you really want to identify needs and partner, it really starts with empathy and compassion first. And the goal, is not that, we want to replace what you're doing or that we want to get rid of what you're doing, or that we want to make a lot of money based on this. But the goal is that we want to empower you to provide better care for your patients, make life easier for you, for example, to scale your mission at the end of the day. And so I think coming with that approach has been very meaningful in terms of developing strong relationships. Although it sounds like I need to develop even stronger ones so they feel comfortable, sharing kind of all of their needs with me. But I very much strongly agree that having that presence there and being someone, and the other thing that we had to even on communication, because when I would ask them, what is a problem, there are no problems. It's like there's no everything is fine, like there are no problems. But then if I say, okay, like, you know, what made you hesitate today? What made you like, what made this take longer than it did? So I think also like understanding the language is also, I think, very important. And you have to maybe ask things 3 different ways before you can really dig into the unmet need at the end of the day.
Anand, do you have any comments on that, on how, from a corporate perspective, you deal with the same challenge?
Yeah, I think for us, I think everything that we do is about what's the larger purpose? What are we trying to do over here? And I think what drives us all to work is that every decision that we take is going to make a difference in somebody's life, whether it is solving somebody's chronic kidney disease issue, diabetes, cardiovascular issue. So every decision is made with that in mind. And I tell this to people who want to be in MedTech. Be in it because you really want to make a difference. Don't be in it because it's just another job. So I think it's the first, that's the purpose, I think. And whenever we do anything with, whether it's a government or whether it's a hospital or whether it's a physician, it's all about how do we ensure that we are trying to serve their needs, but really understand not just their felt needs, but what could be their needs of the future. So that's extremely important, and doing it with empathy, doing it with creativity, doing it with teamwork. Those are kind of the fundamental pillars with which we approach any project that we do. And it's not just in India, let me just say this, it's across the world. You know, so if you don't have that, then probably there's something missing.
Wonderful. So we have about 15 minutes left. I have some more questions of my own, but I wanted to see if anyone from the audience wants to stand up and ask a question. Yes, please.
My name is Sharu Nair, and I was curious to know if you had to encapsulate this incredible wisdom that came across here and in the earlier today and yesterday, what are the top 3 things that, first of all, you know, folks in your positions of power and influence must focus on in this next iteration, as well as maybe 1, 2, or 3 things, or even just one thing that the rest of us in the ecosystem can come alongside and support your work as well as our collective work? Thank you.
Great question. Top 3 things. So we'll do that at the very end. We'll wrap up and say, give us your top 3. How about that? All right. So that's an excellent question. Yes, please.
One question that I always struggle with, like when either like students from India or here ask about, and I have my background in biomedical engineering, I work for a company called Stryker here, is when big companies try to make a presence in India, or if it's a startup that's trying to start something in India, how do people decide or understand the decision-making process there? Because in here, things are a little bit more straightforward. Like you know who you need to go to and convince to sell your product, right? Like the hospital administrator, physicians, you know who those spheres of influence are. And in India, it's very different depending on like tier 1 versus tier 2 and tier 3. And there are like unspoken rules of like, you might never know that's the person who's actually making the decision. We could spend a lot of time talking to like real patients, but then the decision to actually adopt the technology might come from very different sources. What would be some of your advice and guidance in how to decipher that process and anything in that regard?
Excellent question. Yes.
Okay. The spirit of curiosity can drive you to very different places. And I think I've seen that happen across the world. So it always starts with who cares and why. Okay. And that could be different people. It could be the procurement person in some country. It could be the chief medical officer in another country. It could be, there are different stakeholders in different countries. And so finding your way and navigating your way, the best way to do that is go out there, meet people. To understand it. There's no golden rule over there. But the essence of that will be always looking at who has the most amount of pain, which is why I said who cares more. So who's going to face the most pain based on whatever you're trying to provide for them? Whether it is a clinical pain, whether it's an operational pain, or it's a financial pain. And it could be actually all 3. Right? So really looking at who is the person who can be the fire starter in that place because they have the most amount of pain is where you start. And to uncover that, to go out there and be there and meet them.
Add to that. So Anand actually took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say the exact same thing, is that you have to go there. And I can give you maybe an example from our experience. So as I mentioned, we make advanced upper limb prosthetic solutions. So when we were trying to explore India again, we didn't know whom to reach out. Like, this was the first time we were going. So I said, okay, which is the place that sees the most number of amputees, right? And that was basically one of the larger hospitals, so AIMS or Suffolk. And I basically just showed up for the amputee clinic. All of this information was available publicly. So I didn't know any doctors, I didn't know any surgeons, didn't know anybody. But anybody can walk into an amputee clinic, right? So I just showed up and I sat on a chair for half an hour just to see who was coming with the patient, who did the patient consult with, whom did he direct them to after the initial surgical consult was done, who was taking the measurements for the prosthesis. And in those 30 minutes, I was able to identify the informal workflow that existed within at least that hospital. It allowed me, talking to, based on that, I was able to then identify who were the senior residents I needed to chat with, generally to get an idea of what's going on. The senior residents were a pathway to the surgeons that are actually performing a lot of these surgeries and are the decision makers in some cases about, recommending technologies to patients. And then it also opened the pathway to who the prosthetic providers were and introduction. So you have to start by showing up. You might not know anybody at all, but just be observant. And as you observe things, you will know.
I would just add to that many of the hospitals have incredibly close ties with the government and with many of those decision makers. So by demonstrating clinical value add to those people who are experiencing their pain, you can get to the decision makers. And then many of the pretty much every entrepreneur I've met in India is doing this because they care about the impact. And so that means that they don't care if they're making the impact or if you're making the impact. So any entrepreneur I've reached out to, I say, can I ask you questions for 10 minutes on WhatsApp, has taken a call. And will tell me exactly who they talk to.
Yeah. A few more minutes on this very important topic here, because implementation of innovative in healthcare requires people to make decisions to buy a product. Kunal touched on something tangentially, the misalignment of incentives sometimes, and I think Jordan or maybe you mentioned the power structure, the role it plays in that decision making. Coming from a country like the United States, where we have shunned all sorts of corruption and decision making from the top to the bottom, in our society, we all know that. But in what we found in India, there may be some misaligned incentives. It could be the person who's going to start the fire may have some motivations that are more self-centered, for example. We teach in our ethics class the example of the V-scan device and its use in India and how that creates some ethical challenges. Even though it's a very successful product technologically, there are some incentives that may not be aligned with the interest of all the stakeholders, especially the patient. The patient may be the one who is the most incentive to have a major improvement in the quality of the product, but the least able to speak up or lose power in the whole decision-making process. So, as innovators, we are changing the field. And it's said that leaders don't just do whatever they're doing in the best possible way, they change the nature of the field that they're in. But in doing so, there's going to be shifting relationships. Power structures may shift. People may be young, especially in point of care, people on the further end of the healthcare spectrum may start to become empowered with information and knowledge about taking care of their own healthcare, et cetera. How do you deal with that? Do you sense that that is something that you will have to come back? And how will you address those challenges that are extant in India without seeming like a cultural imperialist or some sort of preachy, American coming in and pretending like we're at a moral high ground here when we design our products? I'll start with you because I know Siemens solved that problem.
Yeah, I think it's tough. Yeah, it's tough, I would say that. And I think which is the reason why it is so important that we have a health system in India that is connected. And when I say connected, I mean an ecosystem where there are payers, providers, MedTech, companies, patients, all connected to each other, right? I think there's a long way to go for that. Well, with Ayushman Bharat, you have digital infrastructure coming in, but you still have this problem of interoperability of data. So when you don't have data, it becomes, all these other things start coming into the picture because you can't track, you can't measure. So then how do you frame outcome-driven contracts? When you can't do that, then other things start to happen. So I think to solve this issue, you really have to have a more transparent system. And to have a transparent system, it starts with creating a very, very robust digital infrastructure. You also have to have a regulatory process, which is smoother. It's not as complex as it is right now. It is a regulatory process that needs to be also harmonized with what is there with the FDA. So harmonized with the FDA and global practices. Currently, that's not the case. So when you don't have a regulatory structure which is easy to navigate, when you don't have a robust digital infrastructure, and when you also have challenges with reimbursements, okay, another big challenge in India, right? 40% is pretty much out of the pocket in India. So when you don't have those three things, these other elements start to creep into the picture. So ultimately, ecosystem needs to be there. It's evolving. It's not there yet, but when it's there yet, this I feel would be alleviated to some extent.
Any other comments on that?
Sure, maybe I can add to that. It's interesting because when you were speaking before about who cares and I think oftentimes and who it's really the patient that cares the most, right? And they're not the ones who are able to say, hey, this is the solution that I need, this is what we need. And they may not have the ability to pay for it. I think that's a place where the incentives clearly are not necessarily always aligned to this is what the patient actually at the end of the day needs, especially when there's such a distribution of different types of patients and demographics there. To me, I think that you asked a very complex question. And I agree, this is a whole ecosystem. There are so many players, so many stakeholders. And I do think that the trajectory is correct. Like things are moving in the right direction, even if it's slowly. What I would say is I think we should still start with the unmet need at the end of the day. And I think more so than in the past, I think that if we are focused on the need that all of those stakeholders care about, I think that gives you the best chance at the end of the day, right? So it's still, you have to thread a very, 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 very thin needle, but you're giving yourself the best chance at the end of the day to do that. And so, I think that in the past, and this is where people have been very successful, right? In taking, for example, an intraocular lens technology developed in the US. Okay, let's bring that to India 20 years later. Let's reduce the cost by manufacturing in India. And now it's successful. But I don't think that's what tomorrow should look. I think tomorrow should look like what is the actual need for the patient, the stakeholder, the doctor, the healthcare system itself. And let's develop the best possible solution for that group of people fundamentally. And I think that, especially in the age of AI, an AI that's developed here, trained on US patient data sets, European patient data sets, fundamentally it's not even going to work in India at all either. Right. So I think if we actually are focused on what are those specific unmet needs, what are those patients going through, what are those physicians going through, what are those care providers going through, what is the context of care there, I think that gives us the best chance of actually then threading that needle through, go through regulatory and adoption and all these other reimbursement, all these other aspects of the puzzle.
The one other thing that I'll add is, what I've been noticing, in our area of work is that I think the patient is getting more empowered and are becoming bigger advocates for what they need. So I think that helps align a lot of the stakeholders, which maybe we as industry cannot do by ourselves. But an example of this is that, when we were first thinking about exploring India, the reason that decision came about is because we got calls from clinicians in India saying that, hey, my patient found your technology on YouTube. He's asking me for it. He refuses to get fit with anything else that I can provide him. So what is the pathway to me getting our technology? If you had reversed that equation and say, if I had gone to the clinic the first time and said, hey, we have this awesome tech, you should put it on your patients, it probably would not help as well. So I think, empowered patients are probably the strongest advocates that can help bring about systemic change. And I think the pathway to get there is awareness, is, truly empowering the patient with information about what their options are. What is it that they should be pushing their clinical care teams to achieve? And that I think results in, the entire system kind of working through, a common.
See, the top 3 list is already starting to form here. Transparency seems to be on that list. You had a question?
I think it was answered. I was gonna ask about, the bureaucratic and political issues that are also a barrier to entry. But I think that was also covered when you talked about the misalignment of incentives.
Wonderful. Questions from the audience? When I was at J&J, there was a call from the diabetes management group to create a cheaper diabetes monitor, blood glucose monitor. The one coming out of California had like 30 buttons on it. It cost like $50, and the team in India said we could do better. People in India, when they have diabetes, they keep a log and they keep track of all the Bluetooth and graphic display and all that, and they can't afford $50 for the thing. Can we make something that's cheaper and really simple to use? And the folks in California said absolutely not, because then it's going to cannibalize our business here. So the team in India got finally permission. They promised to sell it only in India, and they developed the One Touch Ultra Mini, which was just had one button. Plug in the blood glucose strip, and then it just gives you a number. That's all it is. And then now if you go to CVS for it, that's sitting there on the shelves. It costs like $10. So that was some people call it reverse innovation. Some people call it Jugaad innovation, Google innovation. What role do you feel like that is a huge opportunity for your company, for smaller companies, to see India not as a place where American innovation or Western innovation goes to be perhaps modified and to fit the local needs, but a source of innovation in itself where totally different approaches. And the minister this morning who spoke about how India is trying to determine based on the unique aspects of our society, how we should balance things like labor versus capital, et cetera. What are your thoughts on that? And do you feel like there are innovations that are going to come out of your company's involvement in India that will have a global impact, perhaps even in the United States?
Maybe I can start real quick and talk about it from an earlier stage technology development, and maybe you have some thoughts from a larger company as well as both of you. So I think this is actually the most exciting part about working in India. And so I think Youseph was actually the one who really kind of first taught this to me, and then I think my own experience sort of reinforced this. That is the constraints around the need that allow you to have a beautiful innovation at the end of the day, right? So if you need to develop something that's very low cost, very easy to use, and non-specialists can use it, something that's scalable, all of these things that are actually very difficult to put all into one device or one technology at the end of the day. If you actually are able to achieve that, it should be useful in India in that context, but it should be disruptive in other markets as well. And so when we started GIVE and the goal of supervision equity, the goal was, can we work with Indian eye care systems to identify major unmet needs? Can we develop simple, low-cost, affordable, accessible, easy-to-use solutions that also work, right? It has to actually be effective at the end of the day. That if we're able to do that and we're able to generate evidence in India across large populations in very difficult environments for many reasons, then they should be disruptive in other markets where the need may also be there, right? And so I think this was our fundamental kind of hypothesis and proposition. And I think we're starting to see this now, for example, with Vigilant, and maybe you can talk about that. So to me, this is the most exciting part about working in India, is that it's not an opportunity for innovation, it's a necessity for innovation. You have to innovate towards those different constraints and those kind of difficult constraints. But then this is the answer to the innovator's dilemma, right? It's better for you to disrupt yourself than for, it's better for you to disrupt yourself than for Jordan or for you to come and disrupt at the end of the day, right? And at the end of the day, I think everyone benefits from that. All the other stakeholders benefit from that. I don't know if you want to. Sure.
Yeah, I would just add to what Kunal said. So we've worked with Aravind Eye Hospital for a number of years. And this is a hospital that serves a lot of rural patients. They serve over 6 million patients annually, and they do almost half of their procedures for free. And so that would never happen here in the US. We don't have the constraints for it, but they use those constraints to create an incredibly innovative model that relies on the labor force that's present in India, and as well as the low-cost technologies that you can access there. And through that work, we've been able to develop a tool that makes it easy to image the eye. We were just at a conference in Utah, showing this to some of our collaborators in India. And as we were just kind of doing it in the hall, multiple doctors from the UK and the US walked by and were like, oh my gosh, what's that? Like, I would love to have that. So it feels really exciting to see this work that we've designed to be the high quality and provide the best care to the people who need it most, now be able to translate to the US.
Including a comment that you got was that we never would have considered adopting this technology if it wasn't as simple as you've made it, which is because we designed it for that ecosystem in the first place.
Yeah, to quickly add to, Jordan's comment, I think I 100% agree with, what Kunal said and Jordan mentioned. And, we saw something similar, is that, from the prosthetics, perspective, in Western markets, people are not very aesthetic conscious. They, like their prosthesis to look like a robotic limb, or for lack of better words, there wasn't a cosmetically appealing version of this. Looks like everybody made peace today. Looks like Luke Skywalker's arm, how awesome. But, India had this to a standard where they said, patients said, I'm not going to wear something that doesn't match my sound limb. And that was a design constraint that didn't exist anywhere else in the world. It forced us to innovate and find a solution where our technology could be deployed in a form factor that was compatible with, cosmetically matching the sound limb. And now we have takers internationally for it, because up until now, everybody that, really loved their robotic look realized that if I'm going to a dinner party, I kind of want my prosthesis to match my sound limb as well, and that would be a nice addition to my existing prosthesis. So you're absolutely correct. But I think India challenges you in ways that maybe other parts of the world don't, and it ultimately, allows you to meet needs better of patients globally.
I think for companies like us, we always talk about scale, right? What we've begun to pay even more importance to is that scale cannot be scale if you don't consider India. Okay. And this applies to many facets of the business. When you're developing a product, have you tested this? Have you tested user needs in India? Okay. You've gone and seen. Because many times you develop products and say, oh, we want all the bells and whistles, we want Wi-Fi capability, we want, well, guess what? Wi-Fi will not be working in most places in India. Okay. So you need a wire connection. Oh, you don't need batteries. Guess what? You need batteries if you want to go to those rural underserved settings. And that's not even just true in India. Even in the US, they don't want Wi-Fi only capabilities. They want wired, they want battery operated, because there are some very, very rural facilities over here where care needs to be there. So taking those things into consideration when we build products early on itself is something that we do now more of with India and other countries, emerging economies. The second thing that we do a lot more now is really about how do we build access to care. Because that's one of the fundamental problems in India, also apart from affordability, right? How do you build products that truly can be placed and served in various touch points? So we do that by partnering with a lot of organizations, UNICEF, World Economic Forum. There are different funds, global funds available. Global Fund is another organization to really take us to these LMIC countries and provide the access that they have their core competency in through their outreach activities that we don't. So there's a lot of those partnerships also that we're doing. And the third thing I think that we're doing very, very closely is really investing in the talent pool in India. Like I said, there's a huge amount of talent in India. There's a huge amount of talent that can actually, that is digital ready. We put it that way. So a lot of the solutions that we are building for the future are solutions that have a big, massive digital footprint. And for that, the Indian skilled workforce becomes extremely prime for us to be investing in. So as a company, it's not just across product development, it's also across investment skill force and partnerships. Because ultimately it needs a multi-pronged approach. There is no one strategy, that you can say, okay, this is it. There's no one size fits all, there's no one strategy. You gotta have a multi-pronged approach to addressing the problems of India. And like I said, scale does not mean, scale is not, it's not scale, it is not India.
Well, we're wrapping up, we're almost out of time. I wanted to respect your request for top three So to put you all on the spot, let's wrap up, and if you could provide some final comments and your top three. Or you get partial credit with one or two, like of lessons learned for implementing your innovation.
You want me to go first? I can speak, I'm really excited about what you're talking about with access. I think India has one of the most amazing networks of both private and public hospitals, and it's something to really take a lot of optimism in, whether it's ASHA workers or the program that Dinesh sir was talking about, Mata Daddy Merkabam, or I speak Tamil kind of, or the health and wellness centers. And so I think there's just there are really strong systems, and there's a very large workforce that is competent and trained, and with the right tools can provide very high quality care. So just using that network and figuring out ways to work within the system.
So, it's probably serving on a panel with all of you. So in terms of, my parting thoughts in terms of the top three things that I think can support innovation adoption. One is that, Anand talked about it, that you have various market segments. So if you're a new company trying to explore the Indian market, you can find a segment that you fit in with. You don't have to create it. There's probably a segment that exists and you can, plug right into it in order to be piloted. So I think that's one great advantage. It doesn't exist everywhere around the world. The scale is unmatched. The ability to make impact is unparalleled. So, if you can figure out your pilot in India, you can duplicate it in all low and middle income countries around the world, and potentially in higher income countries around. So I think the potential for impact is massive. And the third is that I think patients are getting highly empowered with more awareness. You will have advocates from within the system that are going to challenge the system and facilitate. So I think these are the three things that excite me the most about working in India.
Okay, point number one, go to India with an open mind. Don't think that just what you apply in the US or other countries. Don't go looking for America and US, don't go looking for India and US. Okay, go with an open mind. Second thing is, this is an ecosystem play. You got to have more and more partnerships, you got to have more parties come along on the ride with you to be successful over there. And the third thing is, overall, be bullish about India. Okay, it is definitely going to be something that all companies are looking at very, very closely, and all companies cannot be successful if India is not part of the equation.
I want to add something before I get Kunal the mic. I see a lot of young, probably students in this room. I think something that's lacking within India is the ecosystems to support young entrepreneurs, especially in the MedTech field. It's a very high risk field. And I've been fortunate enough that Dr. Yazdi gave me $30,000 a year for 2 years to start this, which was critical. But when you have a system where there's a lot of connection with family and reliance, it's very hard for young entrepreneurs. And I'd like to see continued support structures for them to bring innovations to market.
Thank you for making me look so cheap. No, you're the last, but now you have to come up with something new to say.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about true God innovation, right? That's the whole point, right? You got to make something come out of that knowledge, or less. No, I think that this was very well summarized. I think from my perspective, I think this relates to pretty much all aspects of life, but also here. I think it's just important to be the kind of person that people want to work with, the kind of person that people want to advocate for, the kind of person that people want to say, hey, like this is a person that's developing innovation, team is developing innovation that we want to support. They care about our unmet needs. They care about finding a way to make it successful for every patient across the board. So I think being the kind of person, the kind of team, the kind of organization that other people want to work with, want to support, want to find a way to help succeed is the most important thing.
Beautiful. Thank you. What a wonderful way to end the discussion. Thank you all very much. Thank you for the. All right. Great.
Well, thank you to you as well for moderating us so well.
Thank you. Great. For all attending. You still.
Yes, I think the Baltimore campus.
Yeah.
That's the one. Yeah.
And came in all the way from. I'm not responsible.
Probably within.
Step over here and I'll just.
Basically, like,
Center for Bioengineering.
hey, you guys can have,
Yeah.
you guys wanna head out?
I'll say. Yeah. I'll say.